All right, so I am recording this in the middle of a rainstorm on a Saturday morning, and that's how much I care about getting this material out to you guys. So, yes, that's a bit of a guilt trip, hoping you'll actually watch it and finish the entire video because I am up here working this hard on it. But I know how it's going to go probably. So, good news for you guys is as we tackle the second section that we're going to read in the plague, this is a relatively short section. Sections 4, 5, and 6 of book 1 are, very quick and to the point, and there's just not much to them. So that'll be really helpful for those of you who, later we're not going to be so lucky. Let's just say some of the chapters get a lot longer. So let's jump right in here. We're at section 4. We're still like in the beginning stages of this pandemic. Let me back up. I'm thinking modern, not there. We're still in the stages of this plague in the early stages, but it's definitely there. It's definitely been getting around. So now we need to look at a few things that are helping to develop our rising action and to really push us further over the brink with this plague. All right. So as we start in section 4, it says Ryu starts checking into other cases. So we are seeing other people get sick. It's now starting to spread. But at this point, people are still in the mode of blaming other things. All right. So if you want to make parallels today, think about how with coronavirus, how people started dying. And it's like, well, that's because they were old or they died because of heart problems, not coronavirus. And excuse me, my nose is messing up. I'm going to try to quit making that noise. While there is some truth to those statements, there is a precipitating factor that would be listed as the cause of death. And if your heart condition is a continuing situation, and yes, it makes you sick and more susceptible to things, but if you die from a specific thing that pushed you over the edge, that is what is called the cause of death. All right. So I'm trivializing this, and I realize this analogy is flawed. But if I have diabetes and a heart condition, and then someone shoots me, and it doesn't kill me immediately, but it causes, all sorts of infection, and eventually it does cause me to have a heart attack and die. You're going to go to trial. The person who shot me is going to get in trouble, not Kentucky Fried Chicken for serving me fried chicken for years of my life. So, this is another thing we use as a defense mechanism to make us feel like, well, I don't have those issues. That's the other. So I'm not going to get sick. I'm not going to die. So, sorry. I probably shouldn't shoot videos in the mornings. So Ryu is checking into that, but nobody wants to actually still admit that this is what it is. In fact, for the majority of this first book, they're not going to admit what they have in their midst. So we also have another really common thing. The buck is starting to be passed around. Okay, so, so-and-so, I can't call it the plague. We need to get an order from so-and-so, who in turn says, well, I can't do it because this person needs. And they keep kicking it up, the ladder as to who is actually responsible, which, guys, I'm just going to get on a tiny little side rant. When you're old enough, and some of you are now, when you're old enough to vote, whether it be local, state, or national elections, please pick leaders that are willing to take responsibility. We have a just slew of leaders, and this isn't a shot at just a presidential thing. It's everywhere where people don't want to say, okay, this is my job. I'm going to step up and lead, and I'm going to take the bull by the horns and do what I need to. People don't do that. And you know what? It's not just, we can easily say, well, Mr. Morse is just talking about the president. No, I'm not. We're looking at 1940s in another country and another culture, and this is the same nonsense because people get so comfortable and want to be able to keep their job that they don't do what their job is intended for them to do. So we have doctors refusing to call this a plague. We have what they call a prefect, which would probably be some sort of local leader. I'm not sure whether he falls more on the police jurisdiction side or like a legal type thing, like a political position such as like the mayor or something. But anyway, he's a big guy up, and he decides he isn't wanting to put his hands on this either. And that's a real big problem, and this poor town's going to suffer for it. Ryu makes a really neat sentence here where he says the whole town was running a fever. And that sums up the way I think that our country was back in, April and May, particularly, where, you might not have the virus. No one in your family might. You might not know somebody in the immediate area who did, but everybody was acting crazy and nuts. It went all, and it ran the board from, I'm going to stay locked in my room and have my mini fridge stocked and I'm never going to leave, to, I'm going to get my AK-47 and storm the Capitol building because I want to go to Golden Corral. I mean, we all were crazy in different ways, and I'd say some of that still persists. Um, then, like I said, now the thing Camus going to do with his main characters is it's going to be much like the description I gave you guys of Friends, where you start out as a group, and then there's storylines that overlap, but you'll constantly see a little bit happening with these two characters here, and then these three characters here, and then one of these characters and two other ones here, and we're going to see that happening throughout this book. So Gran and Cotard have another little interesting run in now. Of course, your first person narrator, if Ryu's not there, he can't tell the story. So we're getting it in flashback from Gran, who comes to tell him about a strange run in he's had with Cotard. Now, if you really are a careful reader, and I want you to get better at this, you realize these run ins he had with him are really not that strange. Look what he does. Cotard helps Gran clean up a mess that he made. He talks about learning Latin. And then later, he comes by and asks to borrow a match, and he borrows a book of matches. Not really the most suspicious of behaviors, right? But again, it's Gran is very his life is not that interesting, and he looks for it anywhere he can find it. I mean, he's a 50-year-old guy who's basically a middle manager. He's a clerk. He does paperwork all day, and he's just looking for something. And Cotard is an odd character. Let's just be honest. But at this point, he's not doing anything to necessitate this being called strange. All right. At this point, Gran also points out that Cotard wanted to talk with him. Cotard seems to be reaching out, looking for a friend, but Gran says he was busy. Now, remember, Gran's big weakness is he is just not confident, and he is not good with communication. So here he's got a chance to actually work on this as someone who wants to spend time and talk to him, and he pushes it away for the sake of whatever business stuff he's working on, which, let's just be honest, with his job, it's probably not that important. Okay. What we do learn, though, about Cotard is he's worried about the police. And we're going to see several times in this first section, or this first book, how he's trying to find ways to throw the police off of his scent, so that if he does get caught, maybe he'll have enough goodwill built up that he's able to get out of going to jail. This man is terrified of going to prison. That's why he tried to kill himself. So he's definitely not excited about that possibility. Of course, the police aren't really concerned about him right now because, for whatever reason, whatever he did is not strong enough where the police are coming hunting him down because, well, they're worried about the same thing everybody else is, the plague and what's happening in town. So he's not really on their radar at this point. We also see a lot about the media, and, we love to talk. The media is like the big boogeyman in our country today, but the media has always had we act like our country and our media all of a sudden, just within the last 4 years, became this untrustworthy group of people who only report what they want to report and blah, blah, blah. Guys, a couple of things about that. First of all, that kind of behavior has been occurring forever. And second of all, that's not necessarily wrong. The media is going to report what they think that people want to hear. Now, if they're flat out making stories up, that's one thing. But if they're just telling it from a specific angle, that's what they do. You can't be non-biased. If you do that, it would just be like, today, 3,000 people passed away from perhaps the coronavirus, perhaps other causes. In the next story, there was a car wreck. I mean, nobody's going to watch that news. They want it to be written in a way that it gets people's attention. And by doing that, you naturally have to have some sort of bias. So Fox News caters to the conservative crowd. CNN caters to the liberal crowd. And both sides call them liars. And they're not. It's just you're writing for your people at that point. So if you don't like the liberal spin of news, don't watch CNN. If you don't like conservative spins on news, don't watch Fox News. Don't watch them looking for things to poke holes in. So the media here is doing some of the same things we would accuse our media of doing. Let me read it to you. It says the local press, and if you've got this book, it's page 35. The local press so lavish of news that the rats now had nothing to say. For rats died in the street, men in their homes, and newspapers are concerned only with the streets. So the newspapers kind of have faded at this point talking about the plague because, well, it's not in the public eye. I mean, the concept of the plague is, but people are just dying of sickness in their homes. It's not really people aren't dying in the street like the rats were. And now the rats seem to have stopped because, of course, now the people have it and it's spread to them. So the media is kind of taking a slight pause in talking about this. Now, I realize our media didn't. From the day one of this being an issue, the media has constantly run with it. If you were to get on to even a local channel's news station right now, there on your phone, there's a little tab that for all the ones locally that I've seen have like, coronavirus news, and you click on there and you can get all the gloom and doom you possibly could want. But in this point, they quit writing about it because, well, it it just wasn't within what they cared about. But that's bad. I mean, the media needs to be better. Let's just be honest, okay? Um, Ryu meets with a colleague, another doctor, a minor character, who knows this is plague. And he's like, when are we going to call it what it is? This hesitance to give it a name is important. Names have power, names have substance. Remember, our whole year is built around the concept of the power of language. A name has a lot of power to it. And but if you were to come out and say, this is plague, it changes everything, okay? Think about if we travel back to let's say Christmas time, December, and even into January and February, when people were getting sick with the very same thing that people are dying from now. But if we call it the flu, the panic is it's nil. There's no panic. But when we give it a new name and we focus on the worst possible aspects, that name has power. Flu and coronavirus have very different connotations, even though they do have a lot of similarities. Now, that doesn't mean they're the same thing. They're not. And coronavirus is much more deadly, I think. And, well, I know you guys can quote me numbers that say it's not. The coronavirus is much more contagious, let's say, than the flu, and it is able to spread quicker. So they are different. But, if we just call this a strain of flu, we are not in the same position we are. Doesn't mean we should do that. I'm just telling you that there's power in what you name things. All right. So then we kind of end section 4 with the question about, is it worth alarming the public, or should they just be kept in the dark? Remember, we talked about this on Friday in class. We talked about, do we really want to know the truth about everything? And that's kind of how this ends. Now, remember, modern literature is not going to tell you how you should feel. They're going to present the question and let you work that out in your mind, which is why I love every minute of reading books like this, because it's not telling me what to think. It's telling me to think. That is the key. All right. Okay. Going into section 5, we're right here in the middle, page 37 in our text. And what we get is this absurdist ideology. Goodness, mornings. All right. And let me read you a section. This is going to be a little longer. I usually don't read a lot, but let me read this one. Because everybody knows that pestilences have a way of recurring in the world. Yet somehow we find it hard to believe in ones that crash down on our heads from a blue sky. There have been as many plagues as wars in history, yet always plagues and wars take people equally by surprise. Skipping down a little, it says, when a war breaks out, people say it's too stupid, it can't last long. But though a war may well be too stupid, that doesn't prevent its lasting. Stupidity has a knack of getting its way, and as we should see if we were not always so much wrapped up in ourselves. And sections like this make the plague worth reading. All right. Yes, there's parts where it's boring. Yes, some of the characters are a bit weird. Remember, culturally, this is a different group than we are today in 2020 America or USA. 2020 in the USA. There, now I said it grammatically correct. But still, that right there, that little bit of passages I read, that is really powerful. The idea that, once again, this doesn't happen to me. This doesn't happen to my community. It happens to, and I keep using the term, the other, and you're going to hear it a lot. The other is a defense mechanism built in humanity to make us feel like we are in some way immune from the same things that happen to everyone else. In the U.S., we have been so insulated from war on our shores since the Civil War, and when something does happen, like Pearl Harbor or September 11th, when New York was attacked, it hits so hard because that happens in other places. We don't think about it happening here. We know it's happening. We realize there's places like the West Bank over in Gaza and all these areas in the Middle East where there's war on a daily basis. These people live with it, but that's them. That's not us. We do the same thing with things like plague. When a pestilence breaks out, when coronavirus breaks out, that's for old people. And we went through that whole period in the media where it was only old people dying. And you had people saying things like, well, we should still open up things and the old people should just stay home, ignorance like that. So we have those kind of, we find ways to isolate things that are common. Guys, things like now coronavirus is different, but the concept of a pandemic, we have the flu every year and it rips through areas and people die from it. And but then when it hits us in our community, we act like, well, that can't be happening. Why us? This is that concept. It's an element of, anyway, of absurdism. The idea that somehow you're special and you're immune to the things that the rest of the world are dealing with. So, really kind of a really powerful area. We're probably going to spend a lot of time on Tuesday talking about that subject. Okay. Going on, we have it's just we're too wrapped up in ourselves, and man, if that's not humanity in a nutshell, we are too wrapped up in this is my life, this is my stuff, this can't possibly happen to me. We even do it as people of faith. God's going to protect me, but several other hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. Well, God's going to protect a lot of people, but a lot of people are also going to pass away. We need to be aware of that, and it's not like God's killing them. It's just if God protected all of us, no one would ever die. And we already have too many people on this planet. So people are going to pass away. And you're, sadly, me, you, we're just as liable as someone else in many cases. All right. Not always. Sometimes there's extenuating circumstances. But the chances are of, I couldn't possibly get this disease. Well, you could. So, but we get so wrapped up in ourselves, we ignore that. There's another section on 37 still, and I need my glasses for this, don't I? He says, in this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away. And from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away. And the humanists, first of all, because they haven't taken precautions. Skip a little to the bottom of the paragraph. It says, how should they have given a thought to anything like plague, which rules out any future? It cancels journeys, silences the exchange of views. They fancy themselves free, and no one will ever be free so long as there are pestilences. So really powerful passage here. Really in the first book, these first, I believe it's maybe nine sections, that really is one of the more powerful ones. And it's the idea, again, that we ignore things like this because it doesn't fit into our view of what the world is and what our future is. Because if we start buying into this stuff, we realize that maybe we don't have a future, or maybe, our plans are going to change and we don't like that. So we decide this is something that's not going to happen to me. And again, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. This is a psychological thing that helps us cope. If all we did was sit around and think about, I could die from this, my family could die from this, one of my friends could die from this, you're going to not even get out of bed. You're just going to sit there and be depressed. God has built us so that we can kind of compartmentalize these things so we can keep going, because the world can't come to a standstill. But the fact is that we do need to be a little bit more aware of these things and realize that, your neighbor up the road who may have heart disease and be 75 is not as removed from you as an 18-year-old in good shape as you may think, because we're all people. And one of the big pushes in this book is that we should behave that way. We should behave much more kindly towards one another, because we're not as different as we want to pretend. I mean, setting up these walls and differences is something that we do really well and we need to cease doing. All right. So look at there was another section here. Give me a second, because I've got a lot highlighted and I don't want to hit you with all of it, because I want you to do some of the reading, obviously. All right, this part was another one that was interesting. It's on page 38 in the text. They talk a lot about how when death toll numbers get higher and higher, we just kind of lose track of how many people that is. And we mentioned this in class already too, but we're doing that now. When you listen to people say 200 people died, well, that's a number we can kind of process. When it gets up into the 2,000 people died, that still sounds like a lot. But then when you start getting up into 20,000 and 200,000 and 2 million, really to us at that point, it's just a lot of people. And really, the difference between 1 and 2 million we know it's a big difference, but our brain, for whatever reason, doesn't process it that much. So like Ryu even jokingly says something about having people. He says, you should collect the people at the exits of 5 picture houses. You should lead them to a city square and make them die in heaps if you want to get a clear notion of what it means. All right. So, it's like you have to be, we hide behind numbers we see on a screen or we hear in news, and that doesn't hit us as much as if you were to see it. If we were to take, and obviously you can't do this, but if we were to take a tour of Mobile Infirmary where all the COVID patients are right now, and you were to see these people and what they're going through, your attitudes would change drastically. And that's kind of the point he's making. Again, this is in 1940s in North Africa, and 2020 Alabama is no different. I mean, once again, if that doesn't prove we're much more similar than we want to admit, I don't know what will. All right. Page 40 at the bottom, there's another really cool line. He says, still, that could stop or be stopped. It was only a matter of lucidly recognizing what had to be recognized, of dispelling extraneous shadows and doing what needed to be done. Then the plague would come to an end because it was unthinkable, or rather because one thought of it on misleading lines. And he's saying basically at this point, when you really come to grips with the fact that we're in a bad situation, it could hit any of us, all that's left is for you to just do your job, do what is right. And then that's how it ends. Because if everybody does what's right, that's how we overcome difficult situations. Does that mean people won't die? No. But think about this. And yes, this one's going to be a contentious statement. And y'all just bear with me. And if you disagree, you know that's fine. All right. If everybody does the right thing, we emerge from this a lot quicker. If everybody does things like wear their mask, even if it's uncomfortable, if everybody, remembers that maybe it's not the best time to just go hanging out and shopping because you feel like getting out of the house. If we realize that, you don't really need that haircut as bad as you think you do. So, and if we quit putting each other at risk, then it's amazing how quickly things get better. And we can overcome them, but we don't. We worry about what we want. We worry about how it's not going to happen to me. And that's why this stuff continues. And that's the point he's making. All right. This book, in my opinion, there's two characters that are very heroic and for very different reasons. Ryu's one of them, and it's because of that kind of thinking. Ryu's like, I'm going to show up. I'm going to do my job. I'm a doctor. And that's what's going to happen because that's what's right. And we need more of that. Okay. All right, last section of this chapter. I'm sorry, I'm going to mix these terms up. We're still in book 1. We're in section 6 now. And I'm going to really shorten this one because I'm already at 20 minutes. And also because this is just not all that interesting. Camus does a couple of things where he's got sections that are totally dedicated to a character. This one's dedicated to Gran, and it really just gives us a lot about his background. And it fleshes him out a little more, makes him a little bit more of an interesting character. I'm going to just hit the high points of it for you, and then I'm going to get out of here. It says Gran is in charge of gathering various numbers in the town, including death. So kind of a morbid job. He keeps up the number of dead people, and he brings these to Ryu. It's kind of how they get to be friendly. We're going to get a continuation of the discussion of the importance of names, because Ryu is going to suggest that with the increase in deaths, it's time to call this disease what it is. He doesn't want to be the one to make that call, though. He doesn't want to go to the papers or anything and say it's the plague. He's a little hesitant to do this, even though he also indicates that it really doesn't matter. And that's kind of the irony here. So what if you call it the plague? It doesn't like all of a sudden get worse because you acknowledge it. It still is what it is. Us ignoring the naming what it is, just it allows us to cause ourselves more trouble, really. We learned that Gran's working on a special project. Now I'll tell you what it is. He's writing a book. And the interesting thing about him, and this is one of the defining characteristics of this guy, is he never can really get past the first line. He's so busy trying to fix and make that one line perfect that he never really gets past it. And there's a lot to be said about that, but we're going to save that for later. We get a lot of physical description of Gran as well. He's very cowardly and weak is the way he comes off. The tone towards him makes him seem like not a very likable character, although, like I said, good authors will do that. They'll jerk you around. I hate this character. Wait, I see he's a lot more complex. Well, now I kind of like him because that's realistic. There's plenty of people you've met who you didn't like at first and who you changed your mind about later, and vice versa. Okay. We get more details about Gran's job. He's a bureaucrat of minor importance. He's not really of super importance. He is actually valued, though, because he has discretion and he lacks ambition. He just really doesn't care about rising up in the ranks. So many times when you look in the business world, the political world, you've got to watch your back because the person just a little below you wants your job. So you constantly have to think about that. But that's not Gran. Gran is just happy being himself. And if he loses his job or he loses, some of his income, he just tightens the belt a little and keeps on going because that's the kind of guy he is. And that is a really noble characteristic of him. He just wants honest work, a modest income, and time to pursue his hobbies. That's what he wants. Which, you know what? To me, my 11th graders right now are talking about the American dream. I feel like that in today's world is really not a bad dream to have. I want honest work. I want to be able to make enough money to get by and meet my needs, and I want to be able to pursue things I enjoy. That sounds like, hey, that's what Mr. Morris wants. All right. Gran's big problem, though, is he can't really advocate for himself, and he's taken advantage of constantly because he just doesn't know how to speak up for himself. He doesn't have a voice. He also isn't materialistic, which is a great thing. And then line that comes up that really just kind of sums him up. He was one of those rare people who have the courage of their good feelings. Now, there's a little bit of a skip in there. I left a few lines out, but he has the courage of his good feelings. I mean, despite being weak and cowardly, Gron's kind of the character you could be friendly with. He's the kind of friend we all need, who is caring and kind and who isn't about himself. And he is a rare, rare human being anywhere, whether it's fictional Iran or whether it's real life Mobile. All right. So, guys, that gets us through this section. And again, I ran a little long, but we're trying to cram a lot into each of these videos. I want to remind you to do your reading. Even if it confuses you a little bit, you'll get some of it. There are also plenty of resources online that can help you, as well as these videos. So please take the time to get to know this. If you're going to have to do it right. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to stop. I've got to go back and run some notes on chapters or sections 7, 8, and 9. And then I'm going to come right back and film another one. I'm going to try to get all of the week 1 or week 2, depending on how you want to classify your weeks. I want to get all of these done for you and out to you by Sunday so that you can be ready for the next week if you want to get ahead. So anyway, thank you guys for your time. I hope your family stayed safe through the rain last night, and I hope you are enjoying your weekend.